Hello all, these videos are going to be looking at basically what happened after the fall of the Roman Empire. We're going to be looking at the Byzantine Empire as well as Kiev and Rus, which was the predecessor to Russia. So first off, just as a little bit of a recap from period 2 when we were talking about the Roman Empire. Remember first off that before Rome officially fell, the Emperor Diocletian split the Roman Empire into two halves. The more prosperous half had its capital in Byzantium, which was later renamed Constantinople by King Constantine. That's when it becomes a Christian state. And then the western part, its capital remained in Rome. But what really happens here is that, especially after 476, when Rome officially falls to the Germanic invaders, is that the western half, as well as Western Europe in general, falls into decay. Really, we talk about this as the period of the Dark Ages in Western Europe. But by contrast, the eastern portion becomes very wealthy. So that's where we're going to be focusing on the eastern part. So one of the reasons why that is because the location of Constantinople was really key for trade. You can't really see it on this map, but there is a little tiny strait of water. It's called the Bosporus Strait, and that connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. And ultimately, what that means is that Constantinople is a key city that connects trade routes between the east, so it's a stop along the Silk Road, and it also connects the west. And this remains the case even after the Byzantine Empire falls. Constantinople was really always this key city, even when we talk about the Ottoman Empire later. So Western Europe after Rome, just briefly, but we're really going to be focusing on the East. Again, it really falls into disrepair. The roads, for example, which the Romans were known for, are no longer going to be kept up because Rome doesn't have the kind of tax revenue that it used to. As you can see by this map, basically, Western Europe breaks into all these different local principalities. A lot of them, you can tell, are going to ultimately form the language groups and the modern countries. So, for example, if you're looking at the Franks, they, not surprisingly, are going to form modern-day France. So ultimately, what we're going to see is that the cities start to fall apart, the central government breaks down. Because of all these outside invasions, long-distance trade is very difficult, so it virtually stops. People oftentimes moved away from the cities and start to go back to a more rural and agricultural lifestyle. And Christianity, though, remains the dominant religion in this region. So it's one of the best examples of continuity. Even after the greatness of Rome falls, the religion that became so prominent in Rome in its later years does remain intact. And as we obviously know, even today, Rome is the center of the Catholic Church. So let's talk about the Byzantine Empire. You can see a little bit closer here now where the Bosporus Strait is. So again, just notice this is the connector between East and West, right? Because it's this great water connection between the Black and the Mediterranean Sea. You can see here also that this shows us the Byzantine Empire at its absolute height. We oftentimes focus really on a more localized area, which oftentimes we really are looking at parts of eastern Greece. We're looking at the Anatolian Peninsula, which is present-day Turkey. A lot of times we don't talk about how big the Byzantine Empire got. And so this map really shows how large it got when it experienced expansion. So it made up many of the areas that the Roman Empire used to make up. So for example, Northern Africa, Greece, Italy, even parts of southern Spain. So what we're going to see also is that because of the wealth of Constantinople, it was very vulnerable to outside invaders, just like Rome was. And so one of the things that the leaders of Constantinople do that make it survive for as long as it does is that they build very substantial walls around the city. And because of these fortifications, there were attempts to lay siege on Constantinople a few times, but it actually does not fall until the year 1453. And so that means that Constantinople as a city remains intact for over 1,000 years. And that's a very, very impressive amount of time for a pre-modern empire to last. One of the things that we also tend to associate with Constantinople is that it was a very wealthy society. Again, a lot of this is because of its location. As I said in the previous slide, because Constantinople was a walled city, it remained intact for as long as it did. This is actually an image of the final siege of Constantinople in 1453, where you can actually see that the walls are breaking down. One of the reasons why Constantinople did fall to the Ottoman Turks was because they actually used gunpowder technology that was traded from the East, and that allows them to finally break down these walls. Also, because of the wealth of the Byzantine Empire, they were able to pay for a significantly strong military, and this also allowed them to defend themselves for a very long period of time. So even though the Roman Empire did fall ultimately, we are going to see that there are some continuities in terms of the way that the Byzantine Empire was organized. They also had a substantial system of roads, just like the Romans were known for. They paid for these roads through a fairly efficient taxation system. Many of this also was possible because the government was highly centralized and it had an efficient bureaucracy. One of the characteristics that we tend to associate with a bureaucracy, as we already know, is that we are able to get these local rulers to be in charge of tax collection. So as they collect taxes, they're going to be able to pay for infrastructure like roads. These taxes also pay for an efficient military, and we're also later on going to talk in more detail about how the Byzantine Empire was also efficiently governed with a strong legal system. This is a good example of continuity from some of the more ancient empires that we've discussed. And we even see continuity in terms of the fashion of the Byzantine people. They wore similar clothing. You can see this much more in the images below. These are more colorful representations, but they wore the more Roman-style robes and sandals. But we're also going to see some examples of change in the Byzantine Empire, particularly in the case of religion. And also, of course, the Byzantine Empire is located further east, and so we also are going to see that there is more of an influence from these farther east societies. Again, as far as the political structure is concerned, we're talking about a highly centralized empire, right? So we could also compare this to Rome at its peak. Again, like I was saying before, there is a very large and substantial imperial bureaucracy. So what this means is that there were more local leaders that were appointed by the central government that were administering the more local provinces. They did things like, again, oversee tax collection. They also made sure that there was order and stability in the region. They oftentimes would be in charge of other infrastructure projects, so to make sure that roads were kept up, that there was sufficient food to feed the region, if aqueducts needed to be installed or repaired, things along those lines. So we're going to see that because of the successes, at least in the earlier years, of the bureaucracy, the Byzantine Empire enjoyed considerable periods of peace, but we do also see that there are occasional power struggles to the throne, like there are in most empires. So essentially what we see is that these provinces within the empire were ruled by generals, and they had civil authority, and they also had the ability to raise their own armies. So what we're going to see again is that this means that the local people of the Byzantine Empire did not really get involved in the political realm, right? We tended to see that the bureaucrats ultimately administered all of the political jobs of the empire, which meant that it's not really a democratic society, right? Because it's really only these bureaucrats that are able to dictate policy and run the affairs of the empire. So what happened to Justinian? Oh, there we go. Sorry, I didn't realize this was on the same slide. Okay, so Justinian the Great is arguably one of the most successful leaders of the Byzantine Empire. We see his representation here in a mosaic. So he was also called Justinian the Great. We see his years here, 527 to 565 CE. He, as a successful leader, revitalized the city of Constantinople, which is well known for its wealth and architecture and just luxurious examples of art. He most notably expanded the Hagia Sophia, which was a very prominent church, and it's still a very, very good example of the Eastern and Western connections between Constantinople and the rest of the world. Now, this is a more modern image of the Hagia Sophia. When the Ottoman Turks conquered Constantinople and re-established it as Istanbul, which was a Muslim city, they added these minarets, which are the Muslim call to prayer. Previously, the Hagia Sophia was an Orthodox Christian church, so it didn't look exactly like this. Justinian was also well known for his contributions to the legal system. He wrote a system of laws called it was technically called the Corpus Aureus Civilius, which meant the body of civil law, but we can just refer to it as the Justinian Code. Again, just like Hammurabi's Code, it was a codified set of laws. So essentially what that meant was that all the laws were written and put together and organized in a central way. The people within the empire were all fully aware of these laws. They were much more equitable than a previous, less organized set of laws, and it brought stability to the empire because everybody knew what the laws were and everybody knew the consequences for these laws. Another thing that Justinian was credited for was expanding the size of the empire's territory. We see that at its height, again, we can go back to this map here. So we see again at its height, it reached very, very far west, and it also was pushing into the Persian kingdoms of the east. But one of the problems with this expansion is that the empire became much more expensive to rule over, and so these expansions actually are going to be limited in nature. Because of the expense of these expansions, what we're going to see is that after Justinian's death in 565, the empire is going to experience bankruptcy and it is going to contract in size. So what happens there? Again, what we're going to see is that they're going to be outside peoples that are going to start taking over some of the territories that the Byzantines previously controlled. So we're going to see that the Bulgars, who were the Turks from Central Asia, so they're coming from this area, they are going to take over much of the Balkan region, which is over here. Okay, and then we're also going to see that the Germanic peoples are going to take over much of Italy. We already are familiar with that because of the fall of the Roman Empire. And then we're also going to see that Arab peoples are going to come and take over parts of Syria and Egypt and the rest of North Africa. So this, if you see the key, if you see the key of this map here, you're seeing all the different territories that are lost. And notice that everything in yellow was what was lost right after right after Justinian died. So this is a pretty significant loss of territory. So let's take a break here, and we're going to talk about a few more leaders in the Byzantine Empire, and then we will move on to the religion, which is a very significant part of the empire. All right, so stay tuned and thanks.